I'd like to introduce WatchTime's editor-in-chief, Roger Ruegger, who will be moderating our next panel, The Future of Watchmaking. I want to thank you again for joining us for WatchTime Live, and we'll now turn the time over to Roger.
Thank you so much, Julia. We're joined today by a wonderful panel, which consists of Roland Murphy. He is the watchmaker and founder of RGM Watch Company. We also have with us Keith Strandberg. He is what I consider a watch industry veteran and currently serving as Chief Content Officer at Jacob & Co. And we have Russ Povey, founder of TudorCollector.com, your leading source for everything that relates to Tudor online. We are calling in from Zurich, which is myself. We have Pennsylvania with Roland. We have the UK with Ross, and we have Geneva with Keith. So we are once again a truly international panel tonight or this afternoon, depending on in which time zone you are. The topic of this panel is quite easy. I want to have a discussion about the future of watchmaking. And that's not really something that I think has anything to do with COVID-19, even though we're all being heavily impacted. But just in general, there is much more going on. And I think that COVID-19 in most cases has just accelerated a change that has already been going on. And I am particularly happy to have Roland as a true watchmaker in the very essential way how you can describe a watchmaker. Then we have Keith representing Jacob & Co., which is the ultimate high end and a very different target audience compared to what we had in other panels. And we have Russ representing Tudor, which probably is one of the brands with the steepest success stories in the last couple of years, starting with the introduction of the Black Bay, the participation in the Only Watch auction, being one of the first brand from that group offering unique pieces, which has been amazing. So I really think we have a wonderful panel. And I would like to briefly start with a short introduction of my three guests, quite easily with what's on your wrist, guys? Starting with Roland.
Well, on my wrist, I'll get close to the camera here, is a RGM 801 Corps of Engineer watch, which we came out some years ago with. That's our 801 in-house movement. Also has a real Grand Fuhrer fired enamel dot. So it's one of my favorites.
Thank you so much. Handing over to Ross.
Okay, so I'm wearing a 1958 Tudor Big Crown Submariner, reference 7924. And I guess this watch was the genesis of the Black Bay 58, the 58 coming from 1958 when the first Big Crown watch was introduced.
And Keith, wondering what's on your wrist? Have we lost Keith?
Keith, can you unmute yourself?
Zurich to Geneva.
One more time, Keith, unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, is it
There
working
you
now?
are, yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm wearing the Epic X skeleton from Jacob & Co. in titanium. This is our sort of entry-level piece, and it's been in our line for, man, probably 15, 20 years.
Amazing. I'm wearing a Plawprof, the current edition from Omega, because I still have my dive watch panel somewhere in the back of my head. Lisa, I would like to ask you to start the screen sharing with the PowerPoint so that we can briefly have a summary of what's going on with the three brands that we are represented here with today. And please go to the next screen. So Ross, could I quickly ask you to just give us, it's the Tudor Royale and the Black Bay, just to summarize what the brand has been up to in the last couple of months.
Yes, so this watch was an interesting watch from Tudor, the Royale. Integrated steel bracelet on a steel watch. Incredible value, I think, in line with the brand and what they usually do. Quality is brilliant. I actually got to try one of these on last week in Tudor's new mono brand boutique in London, and yeah, I was really impressed by it. they started making integrated bracelet watches back in the 70s. So it's not something new to the brand. And Royal is a name that they were using back in the 50s. So again, Tudor are always very good at playing with the heritage in their brand and bringing that into the modern watches for the 21st century. So yeah, it was a great watch. And then before that, earlier this year, we had the Black Bay 58 navy blue, which again, based on that.
Coming up in a second, Lisa.
Sorry, yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No. It's this is teamwork.
Yes, yeah. So there it is, the Black Bay 58. Again, 58 comes from 1958, which was the year that Tudor released their first big crown submariner, waterproof down to 200 meters, and the watch is very faithful to those original watches, as I showed earlier. I have one on my wrist this evening, 39 millimeter, the oversized winding crown, 200 meter depth rating, but again, playing on those heritage elements of the brand. The watch has the snowflake hands, which came later in 1969 on those blue submariners. So a great amalgam of some of Tudor's most iconic trademarks, and a watch that I think superb value, brilliantly finished. So yeah, a home run again.
I do agree. I also have a Black Bay, and I think it's one of the watches was one of the best price value ratios in the industry currently. Yeah. Roland, when we head over to the next slide, you just released a new model. Could you quickly tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we just released this about a week ago. It's a new addition to our Model 222 Railroad series. The first one came out a few years ago with a boxcar dial. So these are watches that have railroad watch themed or let's say inspiration dials. Another unique thing, most people know us for our 801 movement, our in-house movement. We have 3 of them, but this one, the 222s, always have had vintage Hamilton 10-size pocket watch movement. So we thought mating that with the railroad theme to continue with that was a good idea. So here we have a Type 2 Montgomery dial. It's a real enamel fired Grand Fure dial, just like the original railroad watches were. Montgomery dial has the minutes all the way around the track. As you can see, there's all 60 minutes through there, and the 5-minute numbers are in red. So that's a traditional railroad layout. One of them for really was made for easy visibility. This was something you had to be able to read accurately, quickly. The movements are rebuilt by us. They are very good quality movement. The steel in these movements was, I can't find anything any better, really. The hardness, the quality, the way the steel polishes up is amazing. And these are great running watches. We have first made our first 222 was more of a sort of a dress watch. Then we went to the railroad theme with the boxcar, moved the crown to 130, which kind of beckons back to watches from the teens to the 20s when brands were starting to transition into more wristwatches. They could take a small ladies pendant watch that was more of a small pocket watch, drop that into a wristwatch, and then move that crown. And that's why we would see that at the time. A few other watches on the market. I think only Longines and Vacheron have watches also with a crown at 130. So this is a very traditional looking watch with deep inspiration from America's great watchmaking past.
Thank you so much for the introduction. It looks gorgeous. And before we head over to Keith, we have brought a little video. There is a lot going on at Jacob & Co. these days. They have partnered with Bugatti and they have just been nominated at the Grand Prix. And this is one of their latest pieces, which is a pièce unique.
Right, so this is the Astronomy of Phoenix. It uses the Astronomia case, which is a large case with sapphire crystal and rose gold in this case. And so it becomes kind of a gallery for this sculpture, which is made out of solid 18 karat gold. It's cast and then engraved by a master engraver. Takes a total of 7 months to finish that sculpture inside. And as Roger said, this is part of the Grand Prix, and we also have collaboration with Bugatti, and we introduced the Chiron earlier this year, which has a replica of the 16-cylinder engine of the Bugatti inside. And just last week, we introduced a partnership with Khabib, a UFC fighter who's fighting tonight. He's 28-0, and we hope he gets to 29-0. So we just introduced 4 watches in that collaboration. So a lot's going on at Jacob & Co.
Thank you so much. And I was fortunate enough to have seen this piece twice in real life, once in Geneva, and Keith presented it to me, and it was really, it's mind-blowing. And just with the Grand Prix exhibition. Before we head into the questions regarding the future of the industry that we all are passionate about, I would quickly like to have the next one slide, which gives a little bit of a background what happened in the Swiss industry. And maybe keep in mind that just because we're talking about the Swiss numbers here doesn't mean that we're only talking about the Swiss industry. We have the American industry represented with Roland, but unfortunately we don't have that many numbers. But what's interesting to see is if you're looking at the last 20 years with the watch industry, we clearly see that we have shipped significantly less watches over the last 20 years, but we have increased the value, which means if we skip to the next slide, Lisa, in case you have been wondering why these watches have become more expensive, this is not just a feeling, that's a fact, especially with the category above 3,000, there has been some substantial growth, which also means that the Swiss watch industry has pretty much abandoned the entry-level segment and has focused on, let's say, more expensive pieces in the past. And I think we can turn off the slide share and the presentation now, Lisa. Thank you so much. Now I head back to here. I think the interesting thing is with this background and knowing that Apple, as a producer of the smartwatch who has produced significantly more pieces than the whole Swiss watch industry combined, I really would like to start with a question to Keith. When we look at the numbers of the last 20 years, the Swiss have really abandoned the entry-level segment, and you representing a brand, and I would like to know what is the least expensive piece at Jacob & Co. Has this move to high-end been the right answer?
For Jacob, it certainly has. I'm wearing our entry-level piece, the Epic X Skeleton, which starts at 19,000. And I think in general terms, the Swiss focusing on higher end makes sense because that's what the Swiss do so well. And for Jacob, it definitely is the answer. You know, as I said, we start at 19,000, we go up to $1 million, and the highest watch we've sold is 18 million with the billionaire that was sold to that boxer. So, you know, that's really our segment is going up to the high end, and our customers are looking for us to wow them. And I think in general, that's our, you know, our motto is inspired by the impossible. So we're trying to do things that other brands have not been able to do.
And I did get this correct. You said 18 million.
Yes, that's right.
Wow. Roland, on the other hand, I think that many people buy RGM because of you, because they know what you stand for, what you represent, and that they have a piece that has been made by you, a watchmaker that they can connect to, that they can relate to, that they can talk to. So is, in your opinion, being a owner-run company, is that the answer to this massive change that we're seeing in the industry?
I think we're seeing, you know, you mentioned the Apple Watch for one thing. I think the Apple Watch isn't a bad thing for the watch industry. I think it gets more people wearing a watch. There's so many people years ago that, you know, the last 5 to 10 years, many people weren't even wearing a watch at all. So I think a lot of younger people are getting used to having something on their wrist again, which I think is helping because at some point they may want a nicer watch, you know, a sport watch, a dress watch, a dive watch. And the Apple Watch is more thought of it like our phones. You know, we have it a couple years and it's gone. We move on to the next one. As far as RGM, we don't have an $18 million watch, but our segment, our probably the bulk of our watches sell in the $7,000 to $15,000-$16,000 range. We have watches under that, and we have watches over that, but that's probably where our sweet spot is, falling in $9,000, $10,000, $11,000, $12,000, and we offer a lot at that price point. So we're trying to, because we sell directly to our customers, we are, basically you're dealing with us directly. We don't have the layers of margin that a lot of brands must have, to operate at their scale. So operating at a smaller scale, we do have some benefits there. There's pros and cons in both ways, but I think that certainly we're doing well in the climate that there is out there. So we're able to satisfy our customers in that way.
Thank you so much. And looking at a brand like Tudor and that way targeting my next question to Ross, again, I mentioned that in the introduction, Tudor, I think, has an outstanding price to value ratio, and therefore is accessibility the answer?
Yeah, I think it might be, yeah, because with a Tudor, you're getting serious quality at a seriously good price. And I think, let's take the Royal, for example. I put the watch on. I like the pictures. You can't tell though, can you, with the watch until you actually put it on your wrist. I think the retail here in the UK is £1,700 for that watch. When you put it on your wrist, it feels good, it looks good. And I think that young people who are either getting their first watch, maybe for their 18th or their 21st birthday, or they've been working and they've saved up to buy themselves a watch, they're going to have that money, they're going to go into a shopping centre, try on watches. And I think something like a Tudor, the heritage of the brand linked to Hans Wilsdorf, the whole story behind it, which is overtly celebrated by the brand. They put that watch on, they're going to feel the quality, they're going to see the finish of the dial, the way the watch is made. And I think it's a really appealing watch, and that accessible price point, it is a winner. And I think that's very, very important for Tudor.
Thank you. And I think that also the reactions that we have seen to the watch you are wearing, what makes a watch collectible to you, just in general?
I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to that. I think people buy watches or collect a certain watch that speaks to them. And it really is as simple as why, there's a thing in the UK, and I mention this sometimes, but at Christmas, there's always a real tension in families of whether they choose Quality Street or Roses. I use that in the talk sometimes, and it's, why do you prefer Quality Street? Why do you prefer Roses? And it's the same thing for me with watches. Everybody collects for a very personal reason. It might be just that the watches speak to them. It might be that some people focus on a brand particularly. It might be that people focus on a complication. Making those choices as a collector is, I think, very personal. I think tying that back to Tudor, I think where they're very, very clever is that there is a growing vintage collectors market with Tudor, and the modern watches do play to that target audience as well. So I think they're fortunate in having new, young, enthusiastic watch buyers, but also seasoned vintage collectors love the watches and enjoy wearing them. And there is now a modern Tudor collecting scene that has emerged. So yeah, very interesting. But again, I do think it's down to people's personal choices and what sings to them.
Thank you. And that brings me to Keith, because now with Jacob & Co., you have let's put it this way, a very niche segment of collectors, and a much more playful approach to haute horlogerie, which is quite unusual also, just to look at all these creations. From your perspective, what makes a watch collectible?
I agree with Ross. There's no really way to know why somebody will collect a watch. And Jacob doesn't have the benefit of a long history like Tudor or Rolex or some of these other brands. So we have to go out of our way to do things differently. And I think one of the benefits for Jacob & Co. is that we don't rely on the collector market. You know, we have collectors that buy the pieces maybe for the combination of complications or the uniqueness of it. But we also have people that don't know much about watches, but are blown away by the way that we design or the way that we combine those complications and do things differently. So without the benefit of a real DNA, Jacob & Co. has been able to do things differently enough, which has been from the beginning when Jacob Arabo started the brand in 1986. That's been his sort of way of doing things, is to do things differently from other brands. And we carry that on today. And I think that's the appeal for collectors and for sort of non-watch aficionados who just fall in love with the brand. For example, Drake, the singer, came into the boutique a couple months ago, and he bought the Casino watch. And you know, he's not a watch guy, but he shared with us after he bought that watch that he sees buying a Jacob & Co. piece as a rite of passage for a musician and a rapper. To buy a piece is something that they need to do to feel successful.
Thank you. Amazing story. And Roland, I mean, you deal with your collectors every day and every time you sell a watch. What is your learning from your perspective, being a collectible brand?
Yeah, I deal with collectors all the time, and there's different types. Some people collect things because watches, let's say, because of the movement. They like a particular kind of movement. Maybe they collect high-grade chronographs or vintage watches or a certain level of quality. And with our watches, they may want a real engine turn dial. A real guilloche dial is important. They don't want a stamp dial. People collect watches for many, many reasons, but certainly with the higher grade quality pieces, that's where collectors come into play for small brands like us, because we offer also not only a quality at an incredible price point based on what you're getting because of selling direct, but we also are bringing things forward from America's great watchmaking past or watchmaking in general, offering various, like in our 801, for instance, we brought back a motor barrel. We have a very classical stop second option that you can add. We have the a sweep second with a direct drive. There's a number of things that we have sort of learned from the past, and that makes it collectible too. And then we put the story with those things. The watch that we just introduced, the 222 Railroad with the marginal Montgomery dial. I mean, we give the story about that dial too. Where did that idea come from? When was it patented? We find the original patent drawing. We tell the story of Mr. Montgomery in his railroad service and at the time back in the early part of the 20th century, coming up with these dials that were easy to read. Or the Corps of Engineer watch, which I'm wearing, which you talked about, Ori, the story of those pocket watches during World War I. Those we bring the stories and we do the history and the research, and that adds to the collectability and certainly appeals to the collector.
Thank you. And we're getting tons of feedbacks about that. Everyone who is in Pennsylvania should see your workshop. So I double that. What interests me a little bit, and again, this is not a Swiss point of view. This is more a global point of view, especially because we are in a globalized world, even though this is currently changing a little bit due to the lockdowns that we are experiencing. But the Swiss have been extremely successful in claiming the Swiss made as a quality label. But at the same time, we also have watches made in Japan, watches made in Germany, especially with Glashütte and the history in the Black Forest, and you representing a made in the US product. How important is the origin and might become in the future for a watchmaker?
I think the origin is important to the watch buyer, I think in many cases, for one reason or another. as a watchmaker, it's important for me to make things here. We have increased every year in the last 15 years of what we do here versus what we may have someone else make. So that's obviously a big part of our mission is to actually create and make as many parts as we can right here in Pennsylvania. And that's what many of our customers want, and that's what we hear from them. So, and I'm sure once buying watches from Germany, it's important to them that for one reason or the other that watch is made there. And there is some muddying of the water with some brands over the years as far as where things are made or not made. We won't get into that story, but I think to the individual watch buyer, the origin is very important, whether that be someone buying from us here in Pennsylvania or someone who wants a Swiss or a German watch.
And I kind of think it's important this is not what's better or worse. This is simply a way of differentiation. And I think Keith was with Jacob and Co. I find it interesting. I perceive the brand much more international. So it is slightly less connected to the old traditional, an old Swiss watchmaker leaning over a bench working on a watch. It appears to be much more international. So as if it doesn't really matter where it comes from because it's targeted at a more global audience. How do you perceive that?
Well, for us, it's very important that our watches are Swiss made. We have a headquarters in New York and we have headquarters here in Switzerland. And so all our watches are Swiss made, and we're very careful to let everybody know that they're Swiss made. We don't have our own manufacturer. We use the traditional Swiss supplier model. So we use suppliers for all the different parts, including the movement and so on. But we insist on Swiss made. And I think that for Roland, for example, I'm very impressed by his brand. And I think that telling that American story is really important for him. I agree with you that Jacob & Co. doesn't necessarily have to focus so much on the Swiss made, and we focus more on the creation and the way that we do things. But we also communicate quite strongly that our watches are Swiss made and that we have an office here in Switzerland. Maybe since we have a headquarters in the US, maybe we work with Roland on a special US model. That might be interesting.
That would be very interesting, especially if this would have been the source of said cooperation. I mean, that would be quite interesting. And I mean, with Tudor, Ross, this brand has been extremely early in having a much more global view, yet it is obviously a true Swiss-made brand. How important do you think this is for the collectability of the product?
Yeah, I mean, I think its heritage and roots is very much in that, Wilsdorf family with Rolex, and I think the perception of that has changed. I mean, I think Tudor stands much more on its own now as a Swiss watchmaker. There was a time where it was seen perhaps as an inferior Rolex, and I think they've worked very hard to distance themselves from that as a brand. And I think now, whilst there's maybe actually a slightly closer association between the two brands within the same house now, I think Tudor very much has got its own identity, its own kind of fun element, and I think a lot of that kind of fun element of the brand is grounded in the fact that it is a serious, Swiss watch brand.
Thank you. And again, I somehow want to steer away from COVID-19 because it has had such an impact on the watch industry and every industry. And I think especially with the watch industry, we also do see an acceleration of already underlying existing trends that are now accelerated by COVID-19. But I think what is interesting from an industry perspective, do you, and by you, I mean all three of you, think that the perception or understanding of luxury has changed in the last couple of months? Have people changed their priorities or their values? Or do you think now even more we feel that we deserve to reward ourselves? I give you one example. I haven't seen people queue in front of a watch store quite some time, and it happened right after the lockdown got lifted here in Switzerland. And it obviously happened again once Rolex released the novelties on September 1st. Next morning, we did see people queue in front of watch stores. And again, last time this happened was in the 90s with the Swatch. And the next time it happened was with the iPhone, which was a very different category. So do you think, and again, this is a jump in whoever feels comfortable answering that, do you think that the last couple of months have had a change in how people perceive luxury?
Well, I think that the way people are accessing luxury is different now. And I think the move to digital, especially for Jacob & Co., has made it possible to have a stronger direct relationship with the client, which is really important for us. We still have a lot of boutiques and a lot of brick and mortar stores, multi-brand retailers and so on, but it's really important that we can speak directly to those end consumers, whether it's via Instagram or through our own website or something else. So I think, and I agree with you that people are looking at luxury as a way of reward or a way of to bring joy to their lives now more than before.
Thank you. And I mean, you just mentioned it, and I think a very encouraging example was Watches of Switzerland recently, which is one of the world's largest and also, in my opinion, one of the most innovative luxury retailers that we have in this industry, starting with the exhibitions they do. They have a very different approach to combining modern understanding of retail with physical stores. So that was, for me, very encouraging to see that retail does, in fact, have a future. But obviously, the last couple of months have had a huge impact on e-commerce, which meant that pretty much everyone sold more online. Do you think, and again, this is for the whole panel, that the future of watch retail is online, nevertheless, what we just experienced with the lockdown? Or do you think, because I'm getting so many different answers, especially from retailers and online retailers, that especially with high-end watchmaking or high-end watches, that physical stores and the experience of walking into a store, or in Roland's case, to actually go where the watches are being produced and picking up a watch, is this something that will always be there, or are we in fact moving digitally?
Well, my area is more maybe vintage watches or equally vintage watches. And I think one major thing that has happened during the lockdown has been the move of auctions to an online context as opposed to the sale room. I don't think anybody expected that. And I think the first round of sales in the spring, I think people really wondered what was going to happen. How was this market going to react? And I think everybody was surprised to see how well watches sold online. And I think that that will change the future of certainly the auctions scene. But going back to something that you said a minute ago, I think walking into a boutique and buying a watch is always going to be very important to people. And so, yeah, again, a bit like why is a watch collectible? I think there's always going to be a market for online, but I also think that there's also, when people are making a significant luxury purchase, I think they like to go into the boutique and have that experience as opposed to putting their credit card in and waiting for the FedEx or the mailman to drop it off.
I think that there's been an acceleration, of course, of online purchasing because of the situation. I think that that's going to continue. I do think there is a place for people going into the shop. There's certain customers that that's the only way that they want to buy something, and I understand that. And being a small brand here, we're not in shops all over the world, but we do have people that won't buy unless they come here and look at the watch and sit down and have that experience. That's not most of our customers. That is the smaller group of our customers, but I do see more and more people, let's say, not afraid to buy online that were 5 or 10 years ago. So it's become much more commonplace, much more normal, and this has only accelerated that. So I think that trend will continue, but there's always going to be that segment, especially on the vastly expensive watches that are going to want to hold it, going to want to feel it, going to want to put it on their arm first.
Can I just jump in there? We're doing a pop-up in the Watches of Switzerland Las Vegas store starting in November. And I was talking to the people at Watches of Switzerland, and they made a point of saying that they'll do whatever the customer wants. If the customer wants to buy online, that's fine. If they want to book online and come in and pick it up, that's fine too. If they want to come in and buy and look, that's fine as well. So I think that's where we all have to go. We all have to do whatever the customer wants. We just sold a Chiron through Watches of Switzerland, and the guy had not seen the watch before, but he's picking the watch up in person. So, it's often a hybrid, I think. I don't think we'll get rid of the physical stores, but we have to adapt to however the customer wants to buy. And that's not something the Swiss industry has done before. Before it was, no, this is the way we do it. And I think we lost a lot of ground because of that.
And I think that's the important thing. The hybrid experience is certainly the way to go. And I think that the level of trust a brand has when it comes to the customer loyalty determines the amount of money someone is willing to spend online. At the same time, I always find it almost ironically, especially in times like these where pretty much everything happens online, including this panel, to see how slow the industry quite often is when it is about adapting to new trends. My favorite example, and I mean it's really ironic, I brought the same example last year, TikTok being the most downloaded app, being a gateway to the next generation of watch buyers, being a huge success if we exclude the US where we have the security issues and everything else. But TikTok is big, TikTok is huge. And if you look at which brands are actually using the platform, we have Tudor Watch Club, we have Crayon, Vault, Oleg and Weiss, 7 Friday, and Talker. We don't have the big brands using the platform. And that's always something where I think the industry could quite often adapt a bit quicker. But what interested me in the past is, and again, looking at Tudor, who has a lot of experience in working both with ambassadors like Beckham, like Lady Gaga, which clearly will attract a younger audience. But at the same time, I think its almost extreme rise to fame can probably be linked to the collectors community. How they treated Only Watch, how they entered the Grand Prix. Same goes with Jacob & Co., who has been tremendously successful in the last 2 years with entering at the Grand Prix, even though I was very sorry to see that last year that wasn't actually transformed into a trophy. But nevertheless, they were nominated heavily. And I think this year, hopefully with the Phoenix, they win something that they actually, I think.
Thank you. I hope so too.
But do we need brand ambassadors, or are we focusing on collectors? And I think I think Tudor is perfect as an example because they have understood that there is a collecting community, but there is also a goal to work with the next generation of customer. What do you think, Ross?
I think for Tudor, it really began in 2010 when they launched the Heritage line. So for a few years, the watches had been not particularly interesting to collectors or the market maybe in general, and they were dropped from certainly the UK and the US markets. 2010, the Heritage line was introduced, and I think that was a key moment for collectors when they launched the Heritage Chronograph, which was a modern reimagining of the home plate chrono from 1970. And I think at that point, people started to really sit up and notice in the collector community. I mean, even by, in the last 2 or 3 years, Tudor's had a huge surge in popularity in the vintage market. But I think even back in 2010, the home plate chrono was a serious proposition in terms of vintage Rolex and Tudor. It was, one of the most desirable watches. I think their relaunch of that in 2010 was a moment where collectors suddenly realized that Tudor was alive and kicking and were actually doing the things that people wished Rolex would do. And then in 2012, as you mentioned earlier, the Black Bay was a modern wearable big crown submariner dive watch that people could wear and enjoy. So that was important. But there was still in the, I mean, I'm talking from with most experience from the UK market, there was still a brand recognition issue and people weren't fully aware of Tudor. And I remember very clearly when they announced Beckham as an ambassador. I mean, he's something of a national treasure in the UK, David Beckham, and it was a massive turning point for the brand in terms of the non-collector, non-watch guy community. At that point, people really started to talk about the brand. And I've been running Tudor Collector and have been championing the brand from a collector's point of view for many, many, many years. And it was funny because people would send pictures of the David Beckham adverts to me and WhatsApp them to me and say, "Well, David Beckham's wearing those watches that you love, Tudor. Do you know him now? Are you involved in that?" Because it really was not a huge name in the UK watch market. And Beckham just took that to a whole new level. And, you know, on the sides of buses and on hoardings around the UK and around the world. I mean, he's internationally recognised, but I think it was a brilliant move for the UK, and Tudor saw their market share of watches do incredibly well. And so, yes, I think for them, they've had this like I talked earlier about it being an accessible watch price point, and also they had access to the collector community in the same way. They've had that two-pronged approach. They appeal to collectors, and the ambassadors have opened them up to a whole new market.
Thank you. And we had Drake with Jacob & Co., which is always an interesting example. But Roland, as far as I know, I haven't seen an ad from RGM starting with a famous actor wearing a watch. So I'd like to readdress the question to you and ask how difficult or what advantage do you see in being a truly independent watchmaker in times like these?
Well, I think that, well, there's an advantage is I can do what I want. Will it be successful? I don't know. But being independent, it frees you from, I think, some of the constraints. You can try things, you can do things, you can, because we're on such a small scale compared to brands like Tudor, for instance, that we can be a little more flexible, I think, at times, and adapt to situations quick. Make a decision, make it happen. We're selling directly to our customers. We don't have to worry about retailers, people like that. So it's a little bit of simpler, streamlined situation. We can benefit from being creative, being able to adapt quickly, listening to our customers directly from them to me, not layers of people in between. So we have been able to make little changes here and there and benefit from that in the marketplace, and our customers contact. I deal directly with customers, and I enjoy that, and so I do have a sense of what my customers are looking for, and that helps us to make decisions that are truly based on what we feel our clients are looking for.
And the reason why I was smiling while you were answering the question is we have quite some comments going on in the chat section.
Oh, yeah.
Someone rightfully said you are the ambassador and the VIP. And
well, you want to know why we don't have a famous? I can't afford to have a famous actor or football. We get people ask us all the time, "Hey, do you want to sponsor this football player or this guy or that?" And we say no. so really, it's for us too. It's about the watches. It's not really about someone wearing the watches. And I understand that whole thing depending on the brand. But for us, being small, independent Pennsylvania watchmaker, we have to make it all about watchmaking. And that's what I want to do anyway, because I'm not this brilliant businessman. I'm a watchmaker. I make things I like. I hope other people like them. That's it, plain and simple.
Well, I think we do, and I'm getting signaled by Minda that we're getting a lot of questions, and having already talked about collectors and listening to them, I think this would be a perfect time to have one of these questions.
Yeah, I have some interesting questions, and this one comes from Brian, and it's for all three of you. I know it's about the dreaded COVID times, but let's go for it. He says, all three, thank you so much. The watch industry has struggled like most other industries during this year, but it has proven somewhat resilient, as our presence even at this event shows. Why are watches so important to people even during desperate times? It's a great question.
Keith.
Well, I think watches are important, especially for men, because it's one of the few things that we can wear that shows our personality, I think. And we don't need watches today. We all have the time on our phones and our computers. So I think this is a real, people buy because they love. And I think that's why watches are even more important now, because it shows the things that we love and the things that we care about.
I would say that it's one of those few personal items that we can wear on our body. The car's in the parking lot, right? It's outside, it's here. The watch is with us. And as a man like me, for instance, I don't wear a lot of jewelry. I have a wedding band and I have a watch. Mm-hmm. That's it. So I personally feel that people get a sense of really feeling good about themselves, feeling good about the watch. And if they have a quality watch on their arm, it does make you feel good. You just feel so much better than wearing something that's maybe just a piece of plastic or something. So having something quality, if you understand watchmaking, you understand the movement, the dial, the hands. When things are done right, it does give you an inner feeling. And I'm sure everyone on this Zoom meeting, knows what I'm talking about.
For sure.
I mean, I think we're all here, and I think everybody that's watching this is here because they love watches. And I think it's that feel-good factor that Roger and Keith, Roland and Keith have mentioned, is that it makes you feel good. And I think people need something in times like this that gives them a lift, that can pick them up. Watches are very personal to people, and people collect across every spectrum, from G-Shocks up to vintage Patek complications. And interestingly, during this time, it seems to be every segment of the market has done really well. And I'm not sure it's as simple as people haven't been able to do other things, go on holiday, go out and socialize as much. People have had more disposable income. I'm sure maybe there is a contributing element in that, but also I think it's the fact that people like to make themselves feel good and cheer themselves up. And as we all know, what better way than a watch to do that?
Absolutely. And it's been wonderful connecting with everybody on something on politics and COVID related all weekend, that's for sure. I have one more really interesting question from Kyle. For all three panelists, and Roger actually, how does pandemic 2020 compare to the Quartz Crisis of the 1970s? Who wants to go for that?
Yay! So I hope I can create a little bit of time for the rest of the panel to jump in on that. I think we're in a very different point right now. The Quartz Crisis, which personally I think is one of the most inappropriate descriptions for something that happened than we can have in the industry. And it clearly is something that was made up by the Swiss and not by the Japanese. I give you an example. If a car brand today would start with, we are currently in the electric car crisis, everyone would just rub their heads with a what? Just because you're not innovative enough doesn't make it a crisis for you. So just start being innovative. So looking back at the Quartz Crisis, it was not a Quartz Crisis. It was a lack of innovation from the Swiss. And it's not the fault of the Japanese brands that they came up with something that was much more attractive. So I think that luckily we are not in a structural problem right now, because ironically, as Keith said in one of his answers, yes, no one needs a watch, but everyone wants one. And this is very, very different to what we have in the Quartz Crisis. Even though, looking at the numbers, the industry might be hit much harder than it was hit during the Quartz Crisis. I think it's going to be much more short term because the industry as a whole is in a much better place nowadays. What I don't know is we currently have about 600 brands in Switzerland. And if you talk to investors, if you talk to venture capitalists, you quite often hear answers, and maybe they just want to have the headlines on them saying half of them will disappear. I do not think. We already have most of the year behind us. We haven't had any bankruptcy in the industry. Yes, some of the brands were forced to lay down staff, but everyone is still around. So I think in general, COVID-19, as much as it has hit hard and the industry was hit hardest, it's not going to be that devastating as it was in the 70s when the Swiss simply weren't prepared for someone much more creative and much more innovative. So I hope that created enough time for someone else to jump in and give an answer.
I think the industry is more reactive today than back in the 70s too. So I've been impressed by groups like WatchTime that have done things like this, which make things accessible to people digitally. And I think brands have really pushed forward to go to digital as quickly as they could, and in some cases almost immediately. So I think that's a nice signal that we'll weather this storm and maybe come out of it even stronger.
I mean, I think this is kind of along the same line as Keith's answer then. I think one of the things that's massive now, as Keith said, is digital. And I think the brands are more plugged into their consumers than they probably were in the 70s through social media, through events that take place. Watch brands are very much on the ground, hands-on with the end user now. And I think that old thing around it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the most able to adapt is very true. And I think I've seen certainly over the past 6 months, watch brands adapt very differently to how they get their watches out. And, you know, there was no Basel World, but that didn't stop and make the watches any less popular, or didn't give any of the brands a problem as far as that, from my point of view. I think it made the brands reach out and get out to people more in a more 21st century way, which actually I think has been a good thing, because I think people are really feeling that this year, that they are connected with the brands and that there's a, you know, like the Blitz spirit kind of way of looking at it, maybe.
I agree with Ross and Keith. I think brands are more definitely connected with their customers. In the past, it wasn't possible to be the, social media didn't exist. Also, I think they are able to adapt much quicker and see the response of those changes. And I think, Roger, I agree with you. I think, this has been a bad storm, but I think it's not going to be a prolonged storm. So all of that is true, and hopefully, the watch industry has a very bright future.
Thank you. And looking at the clock of my computer, because
I think I have one final question for everybody, for all of the panelists, from a collector, and he's asking if you could all share what your first watch was and what ignited your watch passion. And then specifically for Roland, who were your watchmaking influences? I think that's a great one to end with.
I can start with that. My first watch, if you've ever watched The Roadrunner, I had a Wile E. Coyote watch, and I still have it. I've actually posted it on our social media. I still have my first watch, and it still works. And I wasn't a watch collector, whatever. It's just I got it as a gift, and I just loved having this little wind-up wristwatch, and somehow it survived my childhood. I don't know how, but it did. And what was the second part of your question, Amanda, for me?
For you specifically, it was what were your influences?
My
Inspirations.
Yes, my inspiration. Well, I kind of got into the watch business by accident. You can watch another video about me on that or something. But once I got into watchmaking, I really my inspiration came from America's great watchmaking past. Really, it did. My inspiration came from the early watchmaking companies here, like Waltham and E. Howard and Elgin, and just seeing what they did and reading the histories, that inspired me to really go deeper into watchmaking.
Okay, I guess I'll go next. I lived in Lancaster County. That's how Roland and I met. I was back in Lancaster County a long time ago, and my father-in-law was actually a watchmaker in Hamilton. He was in fact heavily involved with the 2001 watch, the watch they made for the movie. And so my first fine watch was a Hamilton, and I'm still a Hamilton collector. I love Hamiltons. It was great hearing your story, Roland, about the Hamilton that inspired that watch that you're making. So for me, it was Hamilton that started the journey, and I'm still on it. So I just love Hamilton.
Hey, can I jump in real quick? Keith, that 2001 watch,
Yeah.
When I worked at Hamilton in the 80s, I actually restored the one, the company, there were two watches.
Right.
They still had one. I restored the one that they had for some event they were having in the 80s. Just thought
Oh, that's cool. Was it a functioning watch or was it just a gun?
It was a functioning watch, but not all of the complications worked, but the timepiece did. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Ross.
Yeah, well, growing up, I loved watches. I had Swatch watches. I was into skateboarding, and I used to wear, that thing where you wore two swatches next to each other. But I think my first serious watch was a Rolex Air King 1960s. It's a watch I still have. And that for me, it was the classic oyster case, rivet bracelet, clean dial. It's it was a good. It was a watch that I went to buy with my fiance, who's now my wife, and she picked it out, and it was actually a really good choice because it's quite a rare dial variant with applied Arabic numerals, and that for me just ignited this love of the oyster case, which translated through to my love of Tudor and Rolex over the years. And again, it's a journey I'm still on, as Keith said.
Well,
I'm very fortunate that my dad is not on this Zoom webinar today, because he was given a two-tone Speedmaster reduced from Omega, and he probably never knew where it went. I took it in the 90s, and when I was in the military, I was stationed in Schaffhausen, and there is a small vintage dealer right next to IWC who had the real Speedmaster on display. So I went in and I swapped my Speedmaster reduced, which I never really liked because it's too small and the crown sticks out, to the manual wound original Speedmaster. And I think I paid 500 Swiss francs. And from there, it just went crazy. I cannot count how many two-door submariners I had. I bought one in London, no date Rolexes, etc., etc. But it started with probably the one watch that a lot of collectors started with, the Speedmaster.
Well, we have. I just wanted to let the panelists know. I'm not sure you're seeing. We have a lot of love and enthusiasm coming from the community in the chat. So if you wanted to say anything final to everyone watching, where this is almost the last seminar of our WatchTime Live presentation. So if you wanted to take a minute to say anything to all these collectors out here, I think it would be the opportunity to do so.
I can start with that. I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time to be here, to listen to us chat about these things. We all appreciate the watch collectors. Without them, there is no watch industry, really, if we didn't have individuals buying watches. So we appreciate the enthusiasts, especially here at RGM. Pretty much all of our customers are enthusiasts. So we thank you guys. If we can ever help you, let us know, and we appreciate you, helping WatchTime online. We'd love to see you in person. Hopefully next year in October, we can be at WatchTime New York, and we can talk watches and see each other face to face, and that's what I hope for all of us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all for listening in to us hammering back and forth. you make it possible for us to do what we do. So thank you very much, and keep loving watches.
Yeah, again from me, thanks everybody for tuning in for this, and it always amazes me, this incredible community of people. I think for me, that's what makes the watch world so brilliant, is the people and the community behind the industry. And yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me along this evening, Roger.
I have to thank each and every one of you, starting with my panel. Keith, I know that you're actually at a dinner party. It might look like as if you were in Game of Thrones and sitting on the throne, but it's actually a watch with a virtual background. So thank you for having a break from your dinner party. Roland, it's always amazing to have you on one of these panels. Ross, it was a pleasure meeting you. Actually, and this also is bringing me back to, we wouldn't have probably met without this format. So we have learned a lot, and it almost brings tears to my eyes reading through the chat comments. And I can second that. One of the reasons why I have been covering the watch industry for 2 decades now is the people you get to meet, the passion, the people that make them, the people that buy and collect them. It's incredible. So thank you, everyone. It's been a huge pleasure, and I leave you to wherever I have interrupted you. Best regards to Pennsylvania, to Geneva, to the UK, and handing over to Minda and the next panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Thank you, Linda, and everybody at WatchTime.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you in person soon.
Yeah.